Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Hey, what's up, guys? Just home from work and had time for a couple quick One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute questions. So, as always, reach out to me with your questions. bishopshomegrown@gmail.com, thealchemistcabinet.com, and in my social media, YouTube comments below, all that sort of stuff. I love answering your questions. I always try to do the best that I can. And you want to also take a minute here to, I don't know, I think I realized today something about myself, like the alchemist title, maybe it just had its own effect or whatever, but I started to think about liquor in different ways when it comes to the way that I approach, the way that I make things. And I think it's always been there, but now it's become a little bit more of an actual practicable thing, and realizing that the methodology isn't nearly as important as the approach is. And I think that's what I've been trying to say all along, but not able to find the right words for it. And I think whenever I get the new Distiller's Almanac out there, which is coming very soon, we're actually editing that right now. It's all basically written and ready to go. Most of it. I think I'm still waiting on a couple more contributions from some guest writers and stuff like that. But I think what I'm going to do, because I thought about going back and revising book number 1. But I think instead of doing that, I think I'm going to sit down and try to put pen to paper on the philosophy I just presented to you guys, right? So, and I'll give you an example of what I mean. Let's say that somebody sends me samples to review, whether they're home distillers or whether they are legal distillers. What they want is a straightforward review, and what they send me may be a technically really good spirit, no flaws to it or anything of that nature, right? But oftentimes they're missing something, the thing that makes it special. And it's not in their method, it's in their approach to the spirit. There's something that gets lost, something that misses the mark somewhat for me sometimes. A lot of times, most of the time, truthfully. And even in some of my own spirits, it's been that way. And maybe that's because there's off days, or maybe because you don't feel good certain days, whatever, but I think I could write something pretty compelling on that. So that seed is there germinating as we speak. We'll come back to that. Let's get to your questions today, and we'll go from there and see where that develops into. But I think I've got something in mind that could turn into, instead of going back and updating those 2 original books, this could be its own thing. And then it would be a cool little evolution. You could read the original 2 books and read the almanacs and read this and see the evolution as we go through the years. So, anyways, hey Alan, thanks for taking time. This is from Terry, by the way, sorry. Hey Alan, thanks for taking time to answer all the questions you do. I had a couple, and thanks for answering past questions as well. I've heard you talk about less efficient conversion of grains adding to better flavor. My question is whether or not you could get the same result from running a mash before it goes dry. Would say running a mash at 1.010 or 1.020 give us similar results? Okay, well, that's your first question. I'm going to go ahead and answer that because I know your next question is a little more complicated. To some degree. And what I mean by that is that the difference is that if you don't go with full conversion, you're not converting all the starches and the sugar, and so therefore those starches are left behind in the matrix. And those starches all have very particular aromatic compounds associated with them. Whereas if you stop your fermentation at 1010 or 1020, but you converted everything, there is sugar there, and there are aromatics associated with those sugars that you haven't finished out, but they're not the same thing. They're not equivalent to one another. Now, the sugars could be interesting as an aromatic principle for sure, but don't mistake that there's a difference between the 2 things. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not worth doing or not worth trying. I would say whatever amount that you're going to convert, for me, if I'm going to go through the trouble of converting it, I'm going to let it go dry and I'm going to distill it. right? Now, and I may be missing something in there. Again, maybe it's the approach and not the method, right? But definitely a little bit different than not fully converting what is possible to convert, without a doubt. But I think you can certainly find some interesting aromatics and maybe some flavor compounds there as well. So that might be worth playing with, as long as you have something. I wouldn't do that with something very expensive, right? That would be something I would do with like a corn whiskey or something of that nature. Some grain or commodity that didn't cost a whole lot. On a home scale, that's obviously not as important, but in the in a production distillery, that could get real expensive real quick, and you got to worry about keeping your lights on in a commercial distillery. So, but great question. Also, I love making rum and have, albeit on a small scale, a rum that will be entering its 20th generation. Wow, that's awesome. 20 generations in, that's really cool. I love the flavor, but I also had to split the solids from it. I bet, as they started to take up much of the fermenter space and created a dunder bucket. It's a great use for it. I've heard of people using dunder as a percent of the ferment, a percent of the stripping run, or a percent of the spirit run. If there be any issues with bacteria or any other nastiness, I wouldn't want my final product if I loaded it into my thumper. I tend to do one and done runs, as it's pretty time consuming on a small scale, like mine to do multiple stripping runs and a spirit run. Current setup I have will start pulling spirit at about 170 and hit tails at about 110 or so. This seems to give me enough clean product with plenty of flavor. Thanks again for all you do. That's a great scale as far as your proof goes. The current Artemisia 250 gallon pot still with a double thumper at Old Homestead, she starts off about 160, cuts tails about 120. So that's awesome. It's great for one and done and clean product, without a doubt. So no, adding it to your thumper, as long as you're not puking, you shouldn't have anything dangerous or harmful come across, for sure. You might drive your aldehyde content up, but I mean, that's part of some traditional rums, like Jamaican style rums, right, where you really have that acetaldehyde as a really forward part of those rums a lot of times. So yeah, there shouldn't be any bacteria or anything like that, as long as you don't puke over whatsoever. And that's the way, not into a thumper, but into the stripping or the doubling run. When we made our Stampers Creek rum over at Spirits of French Lick, that's the way that we did it. We made our dunder pit, and instead of going into the fermentation, not that I wouldn't have, because I would have, but I worked with winemakers and they were scared to death that something was going to escape, right? So I was forced to add the dunder to the stripping run or the doubling run, and it worked out great for us. I actually found that I got better results, I thought, when I added it to the stripping run. I think it had a lot to do with that time under heat, what all I was breaking down, what all I was able to pull off. And usually I would try to pour that dunder bucket into the ferment before it hit the still, about 24 hours ahead of time. So it did have a little time to interact as well. Great questions, though, for sure. Those are both really good technical questions, and I appreciate both of them greatly. Keep them coming, guys. I like that. So let's see. We got one about headspace here from Keith. Is it okay to leave some headspace in a barrel? We've got 28 gallons of rum at 55% ABV. I'd like to put in a 30-gallon rye barrel. Will the air that's left negatively affect the process? Not at all. You'll get a little higher evaporation with that headspace, for sure, because you have so much more interaction with air. But the cool thing with that is, because it has so much more interaction with air, you're actually getting oxidization a little bit quicker. And because of that oxidization, you're actually getting some interaction with the barrel woods a little bit quicker. So a great example of this would be Wilderness Trail years ago. They did what they called a sorghum. So it was a sorghum, so it's not technically a rum, but CTB approved label for it to be called a rum, so they called it a sorghum. And they actually took that and put it into once-used bourbon barrels, but they only filled them to like 15 gallons. Right, so these are full 53-gallon barrels that are only filled to 15 gallons. So you can imagine the amount of airspace and the amount of air interaction that was there and the oxidization they got out of it. But still, to this day, a phenomenal product with a great flavor profile, great esterification profile. And I think they would let them set for like a year or something like that, but they did everything that you would want that to do and more in a year, for sure. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with leaving some headspace. In fact, in 53s, normally, now I messed up on this a little bit here lately at Old Homestead, because you get busy doing things and you're filling barrels and not paying as close attention as what you should. Normally in a 53, I will actually leave a couple gallons of headspace, and I leave that for a couple reasons. One is obviously micro-oxidization and esterification, which we just talked about, but the other is because, when you go into a warehouse, you have expansion and contraction. So that expansion and contraction, you can pop a bung out, but you can also pop a barrel head. You have a big storm front come through and you got a barrel that's full all the way up and it's building a bunch of pressure. I have seen barrel heads pop. Well, let me rephrase that. I haven't seen them pop. I've seen the results of what happens when a barrel head does pop. And not only from a product loss perspective does it suck, but also from a cleanup perspective, it sucks. Especially if it's in a warehouse that just so happens to have drywall hanging on the wall that has been hit by whiskey or brandy or whatever spirit was in that barrel. So I do apologize for my voice, guys. I'm still fighting a little bit of this Ohio Valley crud. It hasn't rained here and I don't know how freaking long. And we're getting into late October, and as you can see, this tree behind me, it just now starting to change leaves. That is very abnormal for Indiana. It's also was 78 degrees here today. This time of the year, that's very abnormal. This is normally rainy season. It's normally cool and wet this time of the year, and those leaves should have already been changed and mostly fallen off that tree. So as you can imagine, between the dryness, the cold nights, the hot days, it's harvest season. All the guys out in their combines harvesting their soybeans, their corn, and all that stuff. Anybody with sinuses is struggling, so pray for them a little bit for sure. But guys, please keep the questions coming. I can't wait for you guys to get your hands on this new Distiller's Almanac. And here's the cool thing. So I've decided that if I'm going to be an almanac writer, and as I said in a previous video, there's something I really want to do, something I see as it's as valid as anything that I do as far as I'm concerned. Decided that if I'm going to do this, I'm going to start treating it the same way that the Farmer's Almanac guys do, or the old Farmer's Almanac guys do, guys and gals. I'm going to start writing these things, 18 months ahead of time. So I've already started on 2026. Actually, myself and Brian Cushing, the Victorian Barroom, have started on the 2026 edition. It's going to be something really cool. It's going to be an almanac with a little mini book inside of it as well, with recipes both for spirits and for cocktails and things of that nature. So something I'm really looking forward to. I love doing this kind of stuff, and struggle to keep up sometimes, but I sure do love it. All right, y'all. Love you. Later.